After the events caught on video, no one took the elevator for at least a week. I know since the cameras were still running. We didn't vote on this, but I figured everyone had the same thought. You know, if you leave it alone, it'll just leave. Well, we guessed wrong. After about a week, one of the third floor tenant's family was visiting. No one knew about this, and I didn't know until I got home from work. Speaking of which, I showed my colleagues the video, and it was a split on those that believed me that it was real and those that didn't. I was hesitant to make any copies, but relented after the claim that I was hiding the fact that it was a fake video. I look on a data analyst coworker's face, and she hadn't triple checked the video for authenticity, mirrored mine the first time I watched it. Just had to grin a little that she had not been so vicious in her insults about it was fake, and now she was dead silent. When I got back from work, I didn't even get to the stairs before two of the ground floor tenants ran out to the doors demanding that I let them see the video. I One grabbed my arm and started pulling while the other one got in my face. My jujitsu training kicked in and I almost put both of them to the floor. As I apologized for knocking over the old man, I asked him what the hell they were talking about. I guess it never occurred to anyone that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't contacted prior to showing up. So much for a tight community, you know? I quickly walked upstairs, burning out almost all of the remaining energy I had for that day. I turned on the screen and had to scroll back hours to find out what the hell they were talking about. I found the minute the doors of the elevator opened. 5 personnel entered. It was an adult male and female, 2 teenagers, a male and female, and a boy about 8 or 10 years old. The woman pushed the button for the top 2 floors. This was strange, but they were arguing, so I figured they were just not sure what floor to get on. The teenagers had their heads buried in their phones, and the young boy was looking around. The boy looked up at the cameras and motioned to them and to his mother. She looked down and noticed that one was facing up and quickly backing away because she was wearing a dress. Not sure what she said, but the male suddenly kicked the camera over. He was clearly mad and started looking around for other cameras. He saw the one on the opposite corner and his expression changed to confusion. It was like he was trying to figure out if he was, well, going to get in trouble for breaking it, or so he thought, the camera that was on the floor. The female was clearly still upset, and she maneuvered herself to hit the last camera. In doing so, she pushed the teenagers over to the side. Something I had not noticed before was the fact that the teenagers were both holding drinks. One was an energy drink, and the other was a sports drink. When the woman moved the teenage girl, she was pushed and spilled the drink all over herself. The strange color of the energy drink poured down her blouse, and she flailed in vain in an attempt to keep it from spilling more. The teenage boys seemed to find this amusing, at least until the girl kicked his drink onto the floor, making it splash all over everyone's legs. He, in turn, tried to knock over the last of her drink, making her spill it more over her head, even just a little. The man tried to calm down both of them, while the woman, no longer caring about the camera, tried to get them to all stop moving. The young boy had retreated into the corner by this point and was just trying to stay out of the way. Seeing all this, I wanted to pause and make sure I had some popcorn to enjoy the show, though I was thinking that something would happen to the boy, so I couldn't enjoy the mayhem as much as I would like. I did start chanting, Jerry, 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 at the scene, at least until, without much warning, the walls seemed to melt again, and instead of this thing sliming down to the floor of the elevator, it reached out and grabbed them by the legs. Everyone stopped for a moment, not realizing what the hell was going on, and looked down. That is when what looked like tendrils shot out from the walls and seemed to grab the teenage girl's head and chest. The others reached around and grabbed the teenage boy's shoulder and the mother's skirt. A half a second late, it grabbed the young boy's hands as it clutched the drink it was holding. I was thankful for not having audio as the screams almost shook the remaining camera. They all tried to back away from the back wall, pushing hard against the doors. The woman backed up and nearly catatonic at the sight. The teenage boy tried to grab at the viscous goop that had seemed to reach out only to have it ooze through his fingers and nearly encapsulate his entire hand before he pulled back. The man swung his arm in a motion that made me think he was trying to chop the colored sludge from reaching out, only to have it extend out like flexible spider webs as to not sever the connection. The young boy just stood there, shocked, since he clearly didn't understand the situation. Seeing all this happen in a matter of moments made me think the tenants were downplaying things when they said others had seen it and they said they were attacked. The man tried in vain to break the attachments to his teenage girl and the adult female, though every time he seemed to get close, it would simply create another connection around where his hands were. Gaining his composure, the teenage boy did this too, but mainly as to attempt to get this thing off of himself. That is when I saw the light on, signifying that they had reached the desired floor. The doors opened and the females tried to fall out, but it wouldn't be so easy. This thing was not going to let go. In a panic, the man grabbed the teenage girl and yanked her out, tearing the front of her blouse clean off. The adult female's skirt suffered the same fate, as did part of the teenage boy's shirt. The young boy, who I could barely see through the entire ordeal, calmly just walked out. The piece of sludge that had wrapped around his hands had just let go as soon as he started moving. The man, however, was still flailing as he left the elevator, maybe as though he was going to just swat it away. The door shut, and the substance seemed to linger on the clothing of the items left behind. After about 12 minutes, it once again receded back into the wall. When the police arrived, they found all the articles remaining and no creature. I saw one of them pick up the knocked over camera and looked around, at least until I saw the other one next have figured out what was making the false report or something. They didn't contact me, at least. Dumbfounded, I watched it another 4 times, even calling on the neighbors to watch with me, so I knew I wasn't seeing things. I could have gone without one guy seeing the blouse rip off saying, "Nice tits," and another female neighbor seeing the skirt coming off saying, "If she's going to wear a thong, she should at least lose some weight." I will admit I snapped at them a little, but we all did come up with the consensus. The consensus being that this was an almost violent reaction by whatever this thing was. Even though no one got hurt, it just seemed very aggressive. Though the action so far, we know this much. 1. It absorbed liquids of all types, and this includes water, energy drinks, sports drinks, blood, residue from wrappers, and sweat. 2. If it doesn't absorb anything, it gets aggressive as though it's getting ravenously thirsty. 3. We have no reports of it eating anything solid. 4. It seems at least mildly intelligent. 5. Not only intelligent, but timid, as it doesn't like to show itself unless it sees the action as absolutely necessary, as in, it needs to eat. 6. It does not make noise while moving except for some moving outside the elevator. 7. The multicolored change allows it to hide in plain sight, though slight changes are seen after large quantities of certain substances are absorbed. 8. It is slightly inquisitive, noting how it knocked out the first camera seemingly by accident. Further experimentation must be conducted before anything can happen. When I brought this up, several people just wanted to light the elevator on fire and get it over with. Even if it didn't kill the thing, it might scare it away. Though the idea of being charged with arson, along with a pile of other charges, was enough to kind of stop that idea pretty quick. We all went back and forth until we settled on testing the thing to see if we really actually needed to worry. I agreed and told them I would have the cameras remounted by the next day. Thank God for super glue and impact resistant cases, right? It was about 3 days before we started our testing. The first thing we did was put up signs forbidding the use of the elevator outside emergency personnel. The only others in the building that were cleared for use was myself, the landlord, and the former police officer that lived on another floor. We started by setting up a bunch of different liquids and find out to see what it liked or didn't like. That was mainly things like water, juice, coffee, milk, vinegar, beer, and olive oil. We almost had things like hand moisturizer, liquid soap, shampoo, and one lady said we could use her douche as she didn't need it. These were all set aside and left alone for at least 2 days. We watched the recordings together and would find out something interesting. The first things it gravitated to were food-based items. The water was absorbed quickly enough with the juice, vinegar, beer, and olive oil. The odd thing was it started to go for the coffee and immediately retracted away. It didn't like the liquid soap or shampoo at all. That being said, it did slowly absorb the moisturizer and the feminine hygiene product. It wasn't until we looked at the moisturizer bottle to find out it was one of those non-toxic organic dude thingy whatever. We continued these experiments for about another week. We tried things like liquor, battery acid, liquid vitamins, glue, and so on. Pretty much, if we could eat it, then I guess it could too. Though it was clear that it had its favorites. When we tried simple saline solution, it went after it that so much of it that I thought it would eat the damn bag. On one of my days off of work, on the weekend, of course, I held a meeting with everyone else. We were discussing what we found with the rest of the tenants, and we were showing the video clips that we found out. A few had to leave since they really were off by the situation and it was just far too much for them to handle. We had been in the meeting for about 2 hours when the doors slammed open. A tenant that had left was screaming about how it had killed someone. We all ran out of the office and down the hall to see one really big guy twisted and dead in the elevator, with a man and woman being treated by paramedics. The two being treated looked like they were in a state of shock. I looked close, and the woman lived in the building. I remembered that she said that her apartment was a floor or two above me. No, wait. That was the guy next to her. She lived close to the bottom floor. I looked at them, and both were off in their own little worlds. Looking close, I could see them swaying, but not quite in shock. More like they were still drunk. The only injuries I could see were some light bruising on her and some clear injuries on the guy's face. I got a quick look in the elevator before the police started pushing us away. Within a minute, an officer in a suit started asking us about the cameras. Without hesitation, I was pointed out. Thanks a bunch, you guys. The detective, as it turned out, had already bagged the cameras and had one in hand while he spoke. He asked me if I knew the person, which I clearly didn't. He also asked about why the cameras were in the elevator. When I told him there was a creature of some sort in there, he began to get annoyed. His demeanor went from mostly polite to adversarial at that moment. He demanded that he be shown the video or I would be arrested for spying. I had to laugh at that last part, right in his face. When he threatened to arrest me for blocking an investigation, I pulled out a piece of paper from my wallet which had the law specifically for this situation. As soon as he realized he had no pull against me, I offered to actually show him the video, but I did so in the most polite tone I could muster. That is, after two uniformed police officers joined us. Before leaving, I had them turn their body cameras to me, and I made a statement saying that I had video evidence but would only grant them access at this time. I would only do that under their word that they would not use the open door and admission to enter and search my property. Now, I know that truly isn't going to do anything, but getting it on video would keep me at least out of prison. We walked up the stairs and followed by most of the tenants available. The detective wanted them to stay, but I insisted that they could watch the video as long as they didn't puke on the floor. He reluctantly agreed. When we got to my computer, I was able to jump the video back to when the meeting started. Almost immediately, the doors opened and the couple from before were staggering in it. They were both clearly intoxicated to the point of near collapse. They were all over each other before the elevator had gotten 3 floors up and she had already gotten his pants open. Now, I doubt I have to draw you a picture about what sort of thing was about to happen over the next 20 minutes. Though, if you were not watching close, you might miss a few things. In particular, the walls would shift a little time every time they moved. If the cameras were of worse quality, then this could be totally missed. Although every time one of them wiped their mouth, they put their hands against the wall, and the substance would come out and actually clean their hand. At first, you could hear people chuckle at what they were seeing, but there was a feeling in the air that something was going to go wrong. It wasn't until they were on their knees, probably because they couldn't stand up, going at it, and then we saw something major. The creature seemed to reach out to them, kind of like a warm molasses of a blob hung from the ceiling, although this one was reaching sideways. It touched them and seemed to start to encapsulate the more active portions of their bodies. They both stopped, looked at each other, laughed, and kept going. Needless to say, there were a lot of "what the fuck" said by the group watching at that point. The detective turned to me and started yelling, saying things like, "Is this some sort of joke?" I assured him that it was no joke, and everyone, of course, agreed. One of the ladies there told him to just shut up and watch. Now, I wasn't quite sure what the creature thing was doing to them, but I kind of had a rough idea. No pun intended. We watched as they finished, and the fluid seemed to be much more active as it cleaned up their mess. As the two sat down, catching their breath, you could see the woman point the camera and laugh. Then the man did. Then the light in the front of the elevator turned on. The doors opened, and they were no longer laughing. The big guy from downstairs burst in yelling. Being that we couldn't hear him because there's no sound, I can only guess of what he was saying. Then, as the guy got close to his feet, in order to get his pants on fully, the big guy who had walked in just started swinging. A few quick and powerful strikes came to the man as the woman started to try and stop him. The big man dropped the first guy and turned his attention to her. She started screaming and then tried to slap him, which was a big mistake. That big hand slapped her hard enough that the other side of her head smacked the elevator wall. She was down and the big guy tried to fight back. A couple strikes to hit the gut, and the guy had no more fight left in him that was on the floor. That was when the big man stood over them and lit a cigarette. He took a long drag before lifting the first man up, pressing his face against the side of the elevator, then turned the guy's head to face him. The big man paused for a minute as the fluid from the creature creeped up the side of the guy's face. The big man paused and looked as the fluid seemed to taste the blood. Thinking back, I realized that this was the same guy that got slapped before. The big man took another drag, took the smoke from his mouth, and put the hot cherry into the fluid. The fluid quickly recoiled before beginning to cover the entire wall. Using his free hand, he punched the fluid, which immediately encapsulated his hand. Suddenly realizing he couldn't get his hands free, he let go of the first guy, who immediately fell to the floor, and he tried to use his other hand and then his foot to get free. With each new appendage that was applied, the slime gripped on and didn't want to let go. At one point, he was able to pull one hand free with some of the goop still attached. We had never seen a piece broken off before, and the results were strange. The piece around the man's hand seemed to melt off like heated wax. Not in chunks, but not as fluid or as water either. Maybe old cold motor oil would be a better example. Regardless, that really seemed to piss it off. It still held on to the other hand as it jutted out in multiple strikes to the body and the face. While it tried to fight it off, he continued to hold onto more and more of his limbs. And before the big man knew what was going on, it had begun to lift him off the ground. The strikes kept coming as it lifted him to the ceiling and began to wrap around his body. The more the man struggled, the more it began to twist him, grabbing larger and larger sections of his arms and legs and twisting them in completely unnatural positions. Several people had to leave the room as we watched it as it finally got a hold of the head and began to pull and twist. The man fought with everything he had, but at this point the ooze had grabbed on far too much from him to break free. Then, just as his right foot had been brought up to his head and his left arm had been twisted to the point where no joint could possibly still be in place, the vertebrae in his neck finally gave under the tension and the body went limp. The two people in the elevator just looked in horror as the fluid bent the body some more and then began to slowly recede. After about a minute, it seemed to just let the body of the man fall to the ground and land with a thud in the middle of the two drunk lovers. The woman then completely lost it and vomited violently on the floor. The man, probably still in pain from the beating he just took, looked on. They sat back, and the creature returned again, but this time it just absorbed the contents of the woman's stomach that she had left on the floor. When it climbed on the woman's hand, she didn't even look as it stayed on her hands and had a trail of it dangling back onto the wall as she hit the open door button. When she did, she could see the light turn on and the slime, it receded back into the wall. They both got up and slowly walked out of the elevator, leaving the body right where it fell. I scrolled until I could see movement and I let the video play as the police went in, then the EMTs, then the detective with the CSI. We sat in silence as the CSI did a quick dusting for prints, and then once they were not looking, the detective ripping the camera off the place. We looked at the timestamp and I stopped the video. When I turned and looked, most of the people watching had left, to include one of the officers, which I'm sure they went to puke. The detective had the same pale and stunned look everybody else did. I calmly reached onto my desk and pulled out a flash drive. I held it up and asked, "So, do you want a copy or not?"